and welcome to tonight's episode of The People's Report, News for the Left, brought to you by Solidarity TV. Today it is Remember the 5th of November, 2025. I'm here today by myself. Are you being tracked by AI drones? How fast does a glacier melt? Is 5 miles a month fast enough? There's a new club in town. The cover charge? $200 billion. The brutal warlord who is responsible for 1.5 million deaths in Iraq has finally died. So why are people mourning Dick Cheney? Some people think one communist party is too many. Would you take 7? Are you worried about the government stealing your DNA? What if I told you they are? Shooting civilians, shelling cities, detonating car bombs, burying people alive. Would you consider these to be violations of a ceasefire? Why are Trump and the Republicans suing to starve Americans? Trump said AI chips won't be leaving the United States. So why is he sending them to the United Arab Emirates? Why is the winner of the Nobel Peace Prize asking the United States to bomb her own country? Zohran Mamdani won in New York City. What does this mean for the future? All these topics and more will be covered in tonight's episode of The People's Report. Timestamps in the episode description.
Well, don't feel so devastated if you're feeling alienated, because it turns out you're not alone. Just open up your heart, let the revolution start, and grab that megaphone. Solidarity, solidarity, I need you and you need me. Solidarity, 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 solidarity.
AI drones used in Gaza now surveilling American cities. November 2nd, 2025 via the Gray Zone. AI-powered quadcopter drones used by the IDF to commit genocide in Gaza are flying over American cities, surveilling protesters and automatically uploading millions of images to an evidence database. The drones are made by a company called Skydio, which in the last few years has gone from relative obscurity to quietly become a multi-billion-dollar company and the largest drone manufacturer in the U.S. The extent of Skydio drone usage across the U.S. and the extent to which their usage has grown in just a few years is extraordinary. The company has contracts with more than 800 law enforcement and security agencies across the country, up from 320 in March of last year, and their drones are being launched hundreds of times a day to monitor people in towns and cities across the country. Skydio has extensive links with Israel. In the first weeks of the genocide, the California-based company sent more than 100 drones to the IDF, with promises of more to come. How many more were delivered since that admission is unknown. Skydio has an office in Israel and partners with DefenseSync, a military drone contractor operating as the middleman between drone manufacturers and the IDF. Skydio has also raised hundreds of millions of dollars from Israeli-American venture capitalists and from venture capital funds with extensive investments in Israel. Now these drones, tested with genocide and refined on Palestinians, are swarming American cities. Almost every large American city has signed a contract with Skydio in the last 18 months, including Boston, Chicago, Philadelphia, San Diego, Cleveland, and Jacksonville. Last month, ICE bought an X-10D Skydio drone, which automatically tracks and pursues a target. U.S. Customs and Border Protection has bought 33 of the same drones since July. Prior to March this year, FAA rules meant that drones could only be used by U.S. security forces if the operator kept the drone in sight. They also couldn't be used over crowded city streets. An FAA waiver issued that month opened the floodgates, allowing police and security agencies to operate drones beyond a visual line of sight and over large crowds of people. The change has ushered in a Skydio drone spying spree by U.S. police and security forces, with many now employing what is called a drone as first responder program. Without the need to see the drone, and with drones free to cruise over city streets, the police are increasingly sending drones before humans to call-outs and for broader investigative purposes. The saturation of U.S. police departments with drone technology so closely connected to Israel, technology used to carry out war crimes, is a frightening, if not unsurprising, development. Skydio drones will be central to the rapidly advancing proto-fascism in the U.S. and the crackdown on Antifa and other so-called domestic terrorists by the Trump administration. In this context, the bigger surprise is that the rapid expansion of Israeli-linked surveillance drone technology across America has so far gone largely under the radar. Skydio shows once again how Gaza is the laboratory for weapons makers, the place where new surveillance and apartheid technologies are tested before being refined and then used in the West. And next year, Skydio is rolling out new indoor drones. We can only speculate as to what extent these new drones were informed by the learnings accrued via genocide. If you thought that the American surveillance state was in bad shape already, they're not going to be chasing people with drones. And they have been, actually. In the article itself that I didn't read, I should probably not say that I didn't read. I didn't read out loud. In the section of the article that I didn't read on the teleprompter there, New York Police Department is launching drones 55 times a day. So 55 times a day, over 20,000 flights a year in New York City alone to surveil people in order to respond rather than sending police officers or actual first responders into things. And these drones can go over 30 miles an hour. They can go inside buildings and actually create 3D maps of these buildings. They can follow people like into a building and then wait outside for them to leave the building. They're pretty advanced drone technology. Of course, all this developed and field tested in Palestine on the Palestinian people. That's America's big relationship with Israel, is that we use Israel to do weapons and surveillance R&D testing with Palestinians as live test subjects. And these drones are just one more of the pieces of this puzzle. These drones, again, they're being sent by police and law enforcement and like the FBI and now ICE and the DHS to surveil protests like the No Kings protests recently, and then again just for the regular people going about their day in order to find criminals and to respond to calls. They can have charging and launching stations all over the city, so that way the drones can fly a good distance away and then dock somewhere else entirely. It's pretty messed up. And the drone as a first responder program is, to me, kind of insane. Who wants to call emergency services for anything and wait for them to dispatch a drone to your location? Now, I can, to an extent, understand the desire for this. You know, if you call about a fire, maybe they want to be able to see what's going on to get some data before the firefighters arrive. And we all know that people in heightened states of emotion, such as being in a house fire, might not be able to give the most direct information to people, to first responders. They might be busy doing things like trying to leave the house rather than explaining, the fire started in the upstairs bedroom. But that is a small part of what this could be used for, and this isn't what it's being used for. It's being used to surveil people by police departments. I don't think anybody at all wants to be watched from the sky by drones, by police. The Catholic guilt is a thing for a reason. Everyone gets worried about being watched from the guy upstairs anyway, and now it's a guy with a gun who can find where you live and come into your house. If you're enjoying this show, support us by becoming a member at solidaritytelevision.org. Antarctic glaciers saw the fastest retreat in modern history. It could spell trouble for sea levels, report finds. November 3, 2025, via CNN. The Victoria Glacier, roughly the size of Philadelphia, is on the Antarctic Peninsula, a spindly chain of mountains sticking off the continent like a thumb pointing toward South America. It is one of the fastest warming regions on Earth. Grounded glaciers like Victoria, which rest on the seabed and don't float, generally retreat no more than a few hundred meters a year. But between November and December of 2022, Victoria retreated by 5 miles, according to the study published Monday in the journal Nature Geoscience. Understanding more about why this happened is vital. If larger glaciers retreat at similar rates, it could have catastrophic implications for sea level rise, the authors wrote in a statement accompanying their report. Antarctica holds enough ice to raise global sea level by around 190 feet. Victoria's retreat was heavily influenced by climate change, said Naomi Ochwat, a study co-author and postdoctoral associate at the University of Colorado Boulder. The loss of sea ice in the ocean next to Victoria, believed to have been driven by ocean warmth, allowed wave swells to reach the fast ice and break it up, leaving the glacier exposed to ocean forces. As climate change accelerates, we are likely to see more reductions of sea ice in this region, said Bethan Davies, a glacial geologist at Newcastle University who was not involved in the study. This could result in other glaciers losing the sea ice that currently buttresses them, she told CNN. Hectoria is a relatively small glacier by Antarctic standards, and its partial demise won't cost the planet much in terms of sea level rise, said Ted Scambos, a study author and senior research scientist for the Earth Science and Observation Center at the University of Colorado Boulder. However, it's a smaller cousin to some truly gigantic, about the size of Great Britain, glaciers in Antarctica that could conceivably go through the same process as this whole evolution of the ice sheets on Earth evolves with global warming, he added. The next stage is to better establish which areas in Antarctica are vulnerable to the same process. If a huge glacier were to disintegrate quickly, it means that we might have a step change in sea level rise, Ashwat said. The research raises fears that ice loss from Antarctica, which contributes to sea level rise, could occur more rapidly than projected. Along with the rising ocean temperatures melting and helping to accelerate the degradation of the glaciers in Antarctica, there's also a report that came out this week that the coral reefs, the temperature increases in the ocean have pushed coral reefs past the tipping point to where the coral reefs are now catastrophically collapsing. Some of the world's most beautiful, most diverse ecosystems in the world, and the Great Barrier Reef, famous world over for being a fantastic natural beauty, natural habitat for so many creatures, and of course incredibly popular amongst children, well, honestly at this point people of my age who grew up watching Finding Nemo, and they're all just dying. Climate change has been a catastrophe, is continuing to be a catastrophe, and will be the ultimate catastrophe if we don't get it handled. I know that a lot of countries have been making some serious efforts into putting a dent in it. Were Riley here tonight, she'd be happy to talk all about how China's been working overtime to try to reduce carbon emissions, to try to really, really tamp down on global pollution. And the big problem is that pollution is profitable. The companies that contribute to the pollution most don't want to stop because it means changing the way that they operate, and really it means cutting or increasing costs and cutting revenue, cutting profits. And they don't want to do that. Or they are short-term solutions like oil and gas companies that require the burning of fossil fuels that help increase the Earth's temperature and change the climate. And the cessation of their contributions would mean the cessation of their companies. Now, again, many countries, such as China, with the largest or perhaps the second largest population on Earth, is really working to fix that in their own country. But the number one polluter in the world, the number one single polluter in the world, is the United States military. And so the ending of America's forever wars in the Middle East, in North Africa, in Afghanistan, in South Korea, and we're gearing up for, it seems, another one in South America, are all the biggest drivers of climate change. Not to mention the catastrophe that the United States has allowed Israel to unleash onto Gaza. The detonations from all of the explosives, all of the munitions used to destroy the Gaza Strip and to try to eradicate the Palestinian people, to genocide the Palestinians, have been a huge drivers for carbon emissions and climate change. Not to mention the fuel constantly being burned for their jet fighters, for their tanks, for their APCs that, again, they're turning into giant car bombs to Timothy McVeigh entire neighborhoods in Gaza. All of these are contributors to climate change, are deliberate contributors to climate change that we could easily stop, honestly, with a phone call if we wanted to. We don't want to, which is why it doesn't happen. But as a result, as we see, the glaciers are melting right now at a moderate, slightly above normal pace, but If the large ones start to go, we're going to see huge catastrophic rises in sea level and in water levels, and the water table in general. That will really be catastrophic. I keep saying catastrophic, but really that is the only term suitable for what we're looking at here, the climate catastrophe. Anyone who lives on an ocean, sure, but people who live along waterways could also see their homes, their lives ruined by rising sea tides, sea levels. And all of it is really, if we get down to it, just boils down to greed. Corporate greed, wanting to continue to make as much imperial super profits off the fossil fuel industry as possible, exploiting Sudan, exploiting the Congo to get these natural resources, and then going after war in Iraq, going to war with Libya, going to war with Venezuela in order to gain access to this oil. All of fracking right here in Pennsylvania, poisoning water and polluting the water table and the deep soil, all in order to get these fossil fuels to burn for cheap, quick turnaround profits. The good thing is we don't need fossil fuels. Presently, of course, we do. If we stopped having fossil fuels, our entire society would collapse, and not in a good way. But we can pivot off them relatively simply. We can switch to renewable resources. We can switch to nuclear. We can switch to things like hydroelectric, to solar, to wind power, if we want to, if we're willing to make the investment. There are no good reasons to maintain our reliance on fossil fuels. People will often cite jobs in the energy sector, such as West Virginia coal miners. But let's be real, those gentlemen would have a much better life if they weren't in the coal mines all day long. And on top of that, there aren't enough of them to justify the constant celebration, so-called, of coal miners. Because let's be honest, these guys don't care about coal miners. They care about coal profits. If they cared about the miners, they'd be paid well, they'd have good health care, they would have good working conditions, and West Virginia would not be one of the poorest states in the Union. But it is, because the corporate fat cats who own and run West Virginia and the rest of the country don't care at all about their workers in their industry. They care only about the profits those workers create for them. So what are some solutions? Right off the bat, electric cars are not it. Not only do we need to destroy the Congo, or have been destroying the Congo, in order to get the lithium and other precious metals, but cars are still cars. They're going to pollute our streets, destroy our roads, and create hazards for pedestrians, plus spread out cities, requiring more and more and more energy consumption to build and to travel. So the real solution is mass public transit, mass public electric transit that is going to reduce the end use of fossil fuels and can more reliably be hooked up to renewable energy resources. Your electric car can be charged by a nuclear power plant, but it's never going to be solar powered, it's never going to be wind powered. Train can be hooked up directly to solar and wind energy, to geothermal energy, to hydroelectric energy, et cetera, et cetera. And this isn't unreasonable. Many of the world's best train systems are electrified. The longest railway in the world is the Trans-Siberia Railway in Russia. It's fully electrified. So electric rails are completely doable, and people have been doing them for years. And even our current trains are diesel electric, which means that they use diesel fuel to power electric batteries and to power electric generators. And those generators are actually what run the train. So all of our trains run on electric anyway. They just have to be converted into taking electric rather than running on electric or diesel fueled generators. I could really go on about this. That's a different video perhaps. But this is just to illustrate that our reliance on fossil fuels that are destroying the climate, destroying our natural wonders, and raising ocean levels to, once again, I'll say it one last time, to catastrophic levels, are impermanent. They've only existed for the past 100 years, and it's all due to a few people's choices that can be made and unmade if we demand it. If you like Solidarity TV, don't forget to follow us on Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and anywhere podcasts are shared. Forget the $100 billion club. There are now 6 people worth over $200 billion. October 31st, 2025, via Business Insider. Until recently, $100 billion net worth was granted entry to the world's most exclusive club. Soaring fortunes in the AI era have made $200 billion a new number to beat. Tesla and SpaceX CEO Elon Musk, Oracle co-founder Larry Ellison, Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg, Amazon founder Jeff Bezos, and Alphabet co-founders Larry Page and Sergey Brin are each worth over $200 billion, the Bloomberg Billionaires Index shows. They're individually worth more than some of America's biggest companies. PepsiCo, Uber, Walt Disney, and Intel were valued around $200 billion each at Thursday's market close. Luxury tycoon Bernard Arnault, the LVMH CEO, is close to rejoining the elite club, as his fortune has swelled by around $18 billion this year to $194 billion. Former Microsoft CEO Steve Ballmer and Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang could be knocking on the door soon, as their fortunes stand at $181 billion and $176 billion respectively, as of Thursday's close. The 6 existing members of the $200 billion club are collectively worth around $1.7 trillion, led by 2 men in leagues of their own, Musk on $457 billion and Ellison on $317 billion. For a sense of scale, Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway, one of the world's biggest companies with around 400,000 employees, generated $371 billion of revenue last year, has a $1 trillion market share. The half-dozen individuals have grown $330 billion richer as a group this year, with Ellison up $124 billion, Page up $76 billion, and Brin up $70 billion as of Thursday. At the start of this year, only Musk, Bezos, and Zuckerberg were worth more than $200 billion, the rich list shows. This ultra-exclusive club has doubled in membership within 10 months because of the immense buzz around AI, which has boosted the stock prices of big tech companies and the fortunes of their largest shareholders. Oracle has surged 54% year to date, lifting the value of Ellison's roughly 40% stake in the enterprise software giant. Alphabet has jumped 49%, meaning Brin and Page's stakes of around 6% each are worth more than ever. The upshot is that all 3 have crossed the $200 billion mark, with Ellison blowing past that point. Huang and Ballmer also own pieces of AI leading firms. Nvidia, which briefly became the first $5 trillion company on Wednesday, has seen a 51% stock surge this year. Shares of Microsoft, which recently crossed $4 trillion in market value before retreating, are up 25%. Those stock surges have added $62 billion and $34 billion to Huang and Ballmer's respective fortunes this year, propelling them closer to $200 billion each. There's no guarantee that the AI stock boom will keep pushing the ultra-wealthy's fortunes higher and higher, but if it does, the $200 billion club could get a lot more crowded. I would be very curious to learn who needs $200 billion. What could you possibly buy outside of the government for $200 billion that would even be a necessity? These gentlemen, using that term loosely, have amassed more wealth than much of the public combined would ever see in their lifetime. And they don't return any of it to the public. Now, beside the fact that they don't make that wealth is entirely generated by the public, by their workers. Because workers are the ones who create wealth. Owners are the ones who possess the wealth, who take it and steal it from the workers. They steal their surplus value and hoard it away like dragons for what? To join an exclusive club of 6 people, 6 jackasses who no one wants to be around, as evidenced by Bezos, multiple divorces. Elon Musk's multiple divorces, and he has a relationship with exactly 2 of his children, both of whom are under 5. And I don't know the personal lives of a bunch of these other guys, but who cares to know? Zuckerberg famously ruined all his friendships. I don't know about the Google guys. They don't need that money either. And, no one likes being around these guys. So who wants to join that club in the first place? Outside of the quest to own as much capital as possible. Not to mention that it's all being boosted now by AI, which really hasn't, A, gone anywhere, B, isn't profitable, which is fine, profits are bullshit anyway, and has just contributed to the pollution of the earth through the constant consumption of water. About every time someone uses a simple AI tool, it uses anywhere from 1 to 3 bottles of water. So about 16 to 32 ounces of water, we'll say. Fresh water is used to process it, using huge amounts of power in all these data centers that are directly competing with actual people's water and power needs. I believe is it in Memphis that they've been having, maybe Nashville, they've been having a big struggle with water and power complaints due to these data centers. People are being forced out of their homes to build them too, and we have limited fresh water and limited energy production as is, so we either need to produce a ton more energy, and as we just discussed, at this point it's probably going to be fossil fuels, in order to power AI generation. For what purpose? Well, we already covered what purpose. It's not just so that way you and I can go home and generate funny little pictures or imagine what we would look like when we're 50 years old, or to do tediously incompetent online searches, but in order to power and run surveillance and weapons programs for the police, for the military, for neo-Nazi regimes like the IDF and Israel, in order to oppress the people. The people who are already being oppressed by competing with mega corporations for water, for power, for housing, for land, and of course for the wealth that they generate. That's what it comes down to. And this is more anecdotal, I once did the math and I tried to determine what would be a really good amount of money for me to have. I started with, okay, what could I do with $50 million? And I determined that I would not be able to spend $50 million in a lifetime. So my baseline of the lowest level that I had started with intellectually was already so far above what was reasonably or could be gluttonously necessary that in comparison, $200 billion is murderously excessive. And I don't say that to exaggerate. The only way to generate that kind of wealth is through massive exploitation. That kills people. Poverty kills people. Poverty is violent. Hunger is violent. Starvation is violent. Being homeless is violent. Having your health care denied because it's tied to your job or you don't have it is violent. Food insecurity that tons of people are experiencing right now is violent. And all of this violence that is implicit in the system is in order to make the people at the top richer and more comfortable. And just to put it into perspective, the difference between $1 million and $1 billion is in a magnitude of 1,000. So the difference between having $1 and $1,000 is the same difference between having $1 million and $1 billion. So your average millionaire, a guy who in your neighborhood, or probably not in your neighborhood, and probably in some other neighborhood, who managed to, through success and hard work, created himself an enterprise that got him a few $1 million. Maybe they're a really good lawyer. Maybe they've made some miraculously good investments. Maybe they're some kind of performer, a musician, an actor, a writer who has become popular and sold enough of their work in order to make $1 million, is not ever going to be comparable with people like Jeff Bezos, people who have entered this $200 billion club, let alone the $100 billion club. These millionaires in your city, you are all, or you, obviously, you're not a millionaire, you wouldn't be watching the show. You will never be able to even come close to what these people can buy. A millionaire has nice car and house money, although seeing housing costs these days, they have nice car and house money. Billionaires have senator buying money, election buying money, private islands where they can rape children buying money. The well-off lawyer in your neighborhood, the well-off doctor in your neighborhood, the successful writer in your neighborhood will never be able to do that. They probably don't want to either. They and you are so much closer to being homeless, to being food insecure, to being impoverished than you will ever be to being rich. The average person is maybe 2 to 3 paychecks, if they're lucky, away from being on the street. The average American. Most Americans cannot afford an even $1,000 emergency. And then there are people in their country, multiple people, 6 people, and growing, who have $200 billion of wealth and more. I don't know how to justify, if it can be justified, that there are people in America, people anywhere in the world, but people in America who are starving, who don't have shelter, who will freeze to death this winter because it's too cold and they can't go anywhere and they die. That there are families who can't afford to feed their children, that there are schools who have children who don't get to eat during the day, that there are now federal workers who otherwise have pretty decent paying jobs, or at least paying jobs, who are going to go hungry, who are going to go without heat, who are going to go possibly without being able to pay their rent. And at the same time, there are people, 6 people, who can make all of that pain, all that suffering, all of that violence go away the blink of an eye for effectively pennies. And they won't do it because they want you to hurt so that way they can be richer than any human has ever been in the Earth's history. Here at Solidarity TV, we're an independent grassroots news organization, so your support matters a lot. Please consider supporting us at solidaritytelevision.org. Former U.S. Vice President Dick Cheney dead at 84, November 4th, 2025, via Al Jazeera. Former United States Vice President Dick Cheney has died, aged 84. The passing of the Republican politician, who was deputy to President George W. Bush from 2001 to 2009, was announced in a statement released by his family on Tuesday. His beloved wife of 61 years, Lynn, and his daughters Liz and Mary, and other family members were with him as he passed, the statement said, adding that he died due to complications of pneumonia and cardiac and vascular disease. Dick Cheney was a great and good man who taught his children and grandchildren to love our country and to live lives of courage, honor, love, kindness, and fly fishing, the family said. However, Cheney was a highly divisive political figure for many in the U.S. and around the globe, having pushed the boundaries of the vice presidency to lead the Bush administration's so-called War on Terror and its misdirected invasion of Iraq. Cheney was among the most outspoken of Bush administration officials, warning in the run-up to the 2003 conflict of the danger from Iraq's alleged stockpile of weapons of mass destruction. No such weapons were ever found. Despite this, Cheney has insisted that the invasion was the right decision, based on the intelligence at the time, and noting that it led to the removal of Iraqi President Saddam Hussein from power. Cheney's extended time at the top of U.S. politics saw him serve father and son presidents. He led the armed forces as defense chief during the Persian Gulf War under President George H.W. Bush, before returning to public life as vice president under his son. In the latter role, he fought vigorously for an expansion of the power of the presidency, having felt it had been eroding since the Watergate scandal that drove his one-time boss, Richard Nixon, from office. He also expanded the clout of the vice president's office by putting together a national security team that often served as a power center of its own within the White House administration. He clashed with several top Bush aides, including Secretaries of State Colin Powell and Condoleezza Rice, and defended enhanced interrogation techniques of terrorism suspects that included waterboarding and sleep deprivation. The U.S. Senate Select Committee on Intelligence and the UN Special Rapporteur on Counterterrorism and Human Rights called these techniques torture. Years after leaving office, Cheney became a target of President Donald Trump, especially after his daughter Liz Cheney became the leading Republican critic and examiner of Trump's desperate attempts to stay in power after his election defeat and his actions in the January 6th Capitol riot in 2021. In our nation's 248-year history, there has never been an individual who is a greater threat to our republic than Donald Trump, Cheney said in a television advertisement for his daughter. In a twist of his Republican allegiances, Cheney said that he would vote for the Democratic candidate Kamala Harris in 2024. Cheney was troubled much of his life by heart problems, suffering the first of a number of heart attacks at age 37. He had a heart transplant in 2012. Dick Cheney is dead. I wish I could be more cheerful about that. I am pleased. Don't get me wrong. When I found out the news yesterday, I was maybe not overjoyed. I was pleasantly surprised. But we can't treat this as it's some sort of win. He got away with it, and that's all there is to it. Dick Cheney died not alone, but in his home, in his bed, surrounded by family, surrounded by friends, at the age of, 84? Wealthy, happy, not healthy, obviously, because he died, but with a person who had been able to get his heart replaced and live for another 13 years. Meanwhile, his victims in Iraq, 1.5 million people are dead. 500,000 children starved to death because of U.S. sanctions and airstrikes in Iraq before Bush invaded in 2003. You can see in families in Iraq, in these large families, exactly when the United States invaded, because their children go from being normal-sized and healthy to being undersized and sickly. You can see that in family photos of when exactly children were born before or after Bush and Cheney's invasion in 2003. He has irradiated the city of Fallujah. He helped create ISIS, which is still an ongoing problem. He obliterated Iraq. He helped obliterate Afghanistan. He helped destroy Iraq, again, from the 90s, from his time with George H.W. Bush, with their Gulf War, with their invasion of Kuwait, and with the U.S. war crimes associated there. For those who don't know what all happened in the Gulf War in the 90s, the United States buried alive thousands of Iraqi soldiers, buried them alive. And then, when Iraq retreated from Kuwait, which they invaded after U.S. guarantees that they would be allowed to, the United States bombed their retreating soldiers for 3 days in an incident called the Highway of Death. Look it up. If you've played Call of Duty, you might be led to believe that the Russians did it, but the Americans did it to Iraq, who were retreating not just as a military convoy, but as an entire civilian convoy as well. People who were leaving who had been civilian support for soldiers, people who were leaving Kuwait because of the war, people who had been with their family, and were blown up and destroyed by the U.S. Army and Dick Cheney specifically for 3 straight days. And then the United States sanctioned and starved and struck Iraq for another 10 years, resulting in another 500,000 children dead that Madeleine Albright said were acceptable losses. And then, we'll reiterate it again, in 2003, the United States invented claims of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Weapons of mass destruction that had existed at one point, but had been gifted to Iraq and to Saddam Hussein by the United States in order for them to carry out lethal operations against Iranian civilians and soldiers in the Iraq-Iran War of the 1980s. That, for the record, the United States sponsored both sides of by giving Saddam Hussein open military support and weapons of mass destruction that he mostly used against political rivals as well, and Iran, who Ronald Reagan secretly armed through the 80s, through the Iran-Contra affair, committed high treason to do so, and then his scapegoat got away with it too. Also, Dick Cheney shot his friend in the face with a shotgun. You already knew that, but it bears repeating. So, yesterday, when I woke up and I saw that Dick Cheney was dead, was I happy? Yes. I already said so. Dick Cheney is not with us. Today was the first day of my entire life that I have woken up and Dick Cheney is not in existence anymore. That's great. This is not a win for the left or for the American people at all. Dick Cheney was 84 and he died happy. He was not tried at The Hague. He was not hanged for war crimes. He was not flayed alive for his crimes against humanity. He was never tried. He was never questioned. And even his obituaries in the New York Times and CNN hail him as an American hero and downplay, if they even bring up, his multiple crimes against the world. Why did he do it? For money. As the CEO of Halliburton, him and his companies made huge profits on the destruction of Iraq. That's all there was to it. Dick Cheney was an evil, selfish, decrepit man who murdered millions of people for money. And then he got away with it. If you're not tired of hearing my voice, follow us at solidaritytelevision.org. 7 communist parties in Nepal signed unification agreement, November 1st, 2025, via the Left chapter. 7 communist parties in Nepal, including the CPN Maoist Center, led by former Prime Minister Pushpa Kamal Dayal, also known as Prachanda, signed an 18-point agreement to form a unified party ahead of the March 2026 elections, aiming to consolidate left-wing forces and strengthen their political position. The agreement was signed late Sunday evening in Kathmandu. The party's leading ideology will be Marxism-Leninism, and its immediate strategy will be focusing on protecting the gains of the People's Democratic Revolution and laying the groundwork for socialism. The movement will remain peaceful, operating across streets, parliaments, and government fronts as circumstances require. One of the points of the agreement reads, "The agreement underscores the historic necessity of unifying the broader communist movement to accomplish the goals of the socialist revolution. The participating parties committed to protecting the accomplishments of the Federal Democratic Republic, national sovereignty, good governance, social justice, and socioeconomic transformation as they advance towards socialism." The 18-point agreement also outlines a framework for party unification and aims to establish a single, cohesive, leftist entity before the national upcoming elections. Specific aspects include coordination on electoral strategy, organizational consolidation, and policy alignment to present a united political front. The likely name will be the Nepal Communist Party Socialist. The Unity Agreement brings together the following 7 parties: CPN Maoist Center, led by Prachanda, CPN United Socialist, Nepal Socialist Party, CPN Socialist, Jana Samajwadi Party, Nepal Communist Party Maoist Socialist, CPN, semi-body, including Sharon's faction, which was previously split from the Bipov-led Communist Party. By merging multiple leftist factions, the unified party hopes to avoid vote splitting and increase chances of an electoral victory for the left. Finally, some good news. After the so-called Gen Z protests in Nepal, it seems that the 7 communist or socialist parties have teamed up in order to create one solid Marxist-Leninist party to help run the country, based on how well they do in the March elections. This is maybe not a turning point for the country. Again, a country that already has 7 or so communist parties in it probably isn't the worst country on the planet, but it's really good to see that A, they're around and kicking, B, they're going to defend the successes of the so-called revolution, not really a revolution, but the protest movement, and that they are going to coalesce and help fight off the continual ongoing discussion of so-called left-wing infighting, leftist infighting. Unifying the parties is, to me, who is not an expert on Nepalese politics in the slightest, but it is a really good sign that people want to move forward and that they want to create a real winning campaign. When you have my impression of 7 parties that are all named various versions of the same thing, both slightly different variations on, it reminds me of India with the Communist Party, Maoist Communist Party. It's good to get all of the communists together in a room and hammer out one unified line. That's how the Soviet Union more or less did it. That's how China more or less does it. And it worked out for them pretty well. I mean, China's still going pretty strong today with that sort of program in place. So it's good for Nepal, I have to assume. And I'm glad that the so-called Gen Z protests, and I say so-called because it seems that one of the unifying features of these demonstrations is that they are real working class movements. And they're called Gen Z. I don't know if it's just because most of what we see online comes from the Gen Z posters. Very likely that if, the only 3 people in the crowd are Gen Z, those are likely to be the only 3 people with the cameras. So I don't know if it's just perception bias. It feels to me more, though, that it's trying to create some sort of, I don't know if they're going for a childish kind of perspective, if the news is trying to present a childish spin on it, or if they just want to feed more into the generational divide. But regardless of their motivations, I feel like it really disguises the fact this is a real working class movement, like we saw in a lot of the other countries, like Peru, where it was being led not so much by young children. Honestly, Gen Z isn't young anymore, they're in their 20s, but young people, but also by working people of all walks of life. So it's good to see one of these succeed pretty well, it seems. My fears of it turning into another version of the Arab Spring haven't yet come into fruition, which is good. I like to be disappointed in that direction. This week's book recommendation is Frantz Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth. It describes the Algerian Revolution and the decolonial struggle there, mirrored in real time today in Palestine. DHS has been collecting U.S. citizens' DNA for years. September 23, 2025, via Wired. According to newly released government data analyzed by Georgetown Law's Center on Privacy and Technology, the Department of Homeland Security, which oversees CBP, collected the DNA of nearly 2,000 U.S. citizens between 2020 and 2024, and has sent it to CODIS, the FBI's nationwide system for policing investigations. The entries also include travelers never charged with a crime and dozens of cases where agents left the charges field blank. In other files, officers invoked civil penalties as justification for swabs that federal law reserves for criminal arrests. The findings appear to point to a program running outside the bounds of statute or oversight, experts say, with CBP officers exercising broad discretion to capture genetic material from Americans and have it funneled into a law enforcement database designed in part for convicted offenders. Critics warn that anyone added to the database could endure heightened scrutiny by U.S. law enforcement for life. DHS did not respond to a request for comment. For more than 2 decades, the FBI's Combined DNA Index System, or CODIS, has been built as a tool for violent crime investigations. But under both recent policy changes and the Trump administration's immigration agenda, the system has become a catch-all repository for genetic material collected far outside the criminal justice system. DHS has contributed roughly 2.6 million profiles to CODIS since 2020, far above earlier projections, and a surge has reshaped the database. Nearly all of these samples, 97%, were collected under civil, not criminal, authority. At the current pace, according to Georgetown Law's estimates, Homeland Security files could account for 1/3 of CODIS by 2034. The expansion has been driven by specific legal and bureaucratic levers. Foremost was an April 2020 Justice Department rule that revoked a long-standing waiver allowing DHS to skip DNA collection from immigration detainees, effectively greenlighting mass sampling. Later that summer, the FBI signed off on rules that let police booking stations run arrestee cheek swabs through rapid DNA machines, automated devices that can spit out CODIS-ready profiles in under 2 hours. Under Trump's renewed executive order on border enforcement, signed in January 2025, DHS agencies were instructed to deploy any available technologies to verify family ties and identity, a directive that explicitly covers genetic testing. This month, federal officials announced they were soliciting new bids to install rapid DNA at local booking facilities around the country, with combined awards up to $3 million available. The Department of Homeland Security has been piloting a secret DNA collection program of American citizens since 2020. Now the training wheels have come off, said Anthony Enriquez, Vice President of Advocacy at Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights. In 2025, Congress handed DHS a $178 billion check, making it the nation's costliest law enforcement agency, even as the president gutted its civil rights watchdogs and the Supreme Court repeatedly signed off on unconstitutional tactics. U.S. Senator Ron Wyden more recently pressed DHS and DOJ for explanations about why children's DNA is being captured, and whether CODIS has any mechanism to reject improperly obtained samples, saying the program was never intended to collect and permanently retain the DNA of all non-citizens, warning the children are likely to be treated by law enforcement as suspects for every investigation of every future crime, indefinitely. Rights advocates allege that CBP's DNA collection program has morphed into a sweeping genetic surveillance regime, with samples from migrants and even U.S. citizens fed into its criminal databases, absent transparency, legal safeguards, or limits on retention. A system long described as a forensic breakthrough is being remade into a surveillance archive, sweeping up immigrants, travelers, and U.S. citizens alike, with few checks on the agents deciding whose DNA ends up in the federal government's most intimate database. I don't think anyone wants their DNA stored by the government, certainly not if you haven't done anything wrong. Some of the people in this DNA storage have been as young as 4 years old and as old as 96. And that DNA storage is just going to stay. If you've ever been swabbed by officials for any reason, they're just going to keep that. And it's not the only data that DHS is keeping on people. They're also authorized to do face scanning when they engage with people. Face scanning that you are not allowed to refuse. And they're going to store your facial scan data for 15 years, regardless of who you are. If you're an immigrant, if you're an illegal resident, if you are a U.S. citizen, doesn't matter. Your data, your physical biometric data, your face, your iris, your DNA, just gets cataloged and stored as part of their mass surveillance program. And this is bad enough. Like I said, I can't imagine anyone wants the government, regardless of which government it is, the United States capitalist oligarchy, or even a communist or a socialist-like government like China, or an out communist regime, communist state of the future. I don't think anybody wants them to own your DNA, to be able to scan it, to be able to run it through a check at any point. We know that DNA, having someone's DNA, means you can also help track their family. So having the government having your DNA, having your face, something that, at least to me, is incredibly off-putting. It's just like being chased around or surveilled by drones. It's biometric surveillance. And I don't think they have any right, even if they have the legal right, to possess that or to acquire that from people who have not been educated, who have not been charged with any crimes, who have not been convicted of any crimes, and when they haven't received a warrant to do so. It is beyond the pale. And I think every person, certainly every American, should be very upset by this and should honestly create some sort of outcry about it. Because you're not safe just because you fall into the demographic that the DHS and the ICE isn't pursuing. You might be a white, cishet Christian guy, and you might be a MAGA Republican at that. They're still going to scan your face, they're still going to take your data, they're still going to surveil you, and they're going to do this because they want to control you, and they want to be aware if anyone is going to ever act up and say, hey, what's going on isn't right. And perhaps what makes this worse is that Donald Trump's newest statement, maybe not his newest statement at this point, he has 17 of them a day, but his statement that ICE hasn't gone far enough. All of the detentions that we're seeing, the kidnappings, the disappearing, the violence in the streets, tear gassing people in residential neighborhoods, hitting women with their cars and then dragging them out by their hair, smashing people's windows in order to seize people. All of this is, according to Donald Trump, not far enough. So what lengths are we willing to accept for the ICE Gestapo to go to? What lengths are we going to let the jackboots go before we decide, well, that's too far? Kidnapping people isn't far enough. If surveillance isn't far enough. If collecting your DNA, arguably illegally, isn't far enough, with no oversight at the very least. If scanning your face, if using drones to track you, if hitting your wife with a car and then throwing her in jail, if disappearing your neighbors for an inordinate amount of time and then disappearing them again from the prison. At what point have these guys gone too far? Hey, we'd really appreciate it if you consider becoming a member and supporting us at solidaritytelevision.org. Extreme new Trump administration rules threaten to shutter even more hospitals. October 30th, 2025, via Raw Story. A pair of extreme new Trump administration rules aimed at functionally banning gender-affirming healthcare for transgender youth could force even more hospitals to close down. NPR reported Thursday that the Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, drafted a proposed rule that would prohibit federal Medicaid reimbursement for medical care provided to transgender patients younger than 18 and prohibit the same from the Children's Health Insurance Program, CHIP, for patients under 19. Another proposed rule goes even further, blocking all Medicaid and Medicare funding to hospitals that provide gender-affirming care to youth. As Aaron Reed, an independent journalist who reports on LGBTQ+ rights, explained, this would effectively eliminate access to such care nationwide, except at the few private clinics able to forego Medicaid entirely, a rarity in transgender youth medicine. The policies are of a piece within the Trump administration and the broader Republican Party's efforts to eliminate transgender healthcare for youth across the country. Bans on gender-affirming care for those under 18 have already been passed in 27 states, despite evidence that early access to treatments like puberty blockers and hormones can save lives. As Reed pointed out, a Cornell University review of more than 51 studies shows that access to such care dramatically reduces the risk of suicide and the rates of anxiety and depression among transgender adolescents. The new HHS rules are being prepared for public release in November and would not be finalized for several more months. But if passed, the ramifications could extend far beyond transgender people, impacting the entire healthcare system, for which federal funding from Medicare and Medicaid is a load-bearing piece. According to a report last year from the American Hospital Association, 96% of hospitals in the U.S. have more than half their inpatient days paid for by Medicare and Medicaid. It's already becoming apparent what happens when even some of that funding is taken away. As a result of the massive GOP budget law passed in July, an estimated $1 trillion is expected to be cut from Medicaid over the next decade. According to an analysis released Thursday by Protect Our Care, which maintains a hospital crisis watch database, more than 500 healthcare providers across the country are already at risk of shutting down due to the budget cuts. Tyler Hack, the executive director of the Christopher Street Project, a transgender rights organization, said that the newly proposed HHS rule would be forcing hospitals to choose between providing life-saving care for trans people or maintaining the ability to serve patients through Medicare and Medicaid. Today's news marks a dangerous overreach by the executive branch, pitting trans people, low-income families, disabled people, and seniors against each other and making hospitals choose which vulnerable populations to serve, Hack said. If these rules become law, it will kill people. I've never really understood the anti-trans argument. And I certainly don't care to try to understand it. And I don't think anyone else should really care about transgender people in their lives and their communities anyway. Who cares, really? What does it affect? And I've heard all the arguments. Oh, well, we got to protect women. But let's be honest here. Has the government, has the Republican Party, has the conservative movement ever really cared about protecting women? Has the liberal movement, the TERFs they call them, the liberals who are opposed to trans people, have they ever really cared about women? How many did we kill in Iraq? How many have we killed in Syria? How many have we killed in Lebanon, in Palestine, in Libya, in Afghanistan? We destroyed Afghanistan in support of, in the 80s, in support of the Mujahideen, who were radical anti-women conservatives, who one of their major gripes was that the communist government, the democratically elected communist government of Afghanistan, wanted women to go to school, and that you couldn't treat women as physical property anymore. And so we gave these guys who were mad about that a whole bunch of guns and bombs to blow up the country, and then we invaded in 2001 to do it ourselves. And they're still there. They're still running the place, of course. So did we care about women in Afghanistan? No. Did we care about women in Iraq when we destroyed the government and helped ISIS take over half the country? Did we care about women in Syria when we did the same thing, when we just now recognized the leader of ISIS as the lawful president of Syria? Not really. Did we care about it in Libya, which is one of the most successful countries for women in North Africa, when we destroyed the country, turning it into a so-called failed state with open-air slave markets? Did we care about women in Palestine when we denied them access to feminine hygiene products, to health, to shelter, to food, when we armed Israel to commit mass genocide, mass rape, to murder people? Are we protecting women when we allow Israel to hold pregnant Palestinian women at checkpoints until they miscarry or until they have very painful, very difficult labor on the side of the road? Do we care about women here in America when we're denying them access to abortion, denying them access to health care, broadly speaking, let alone reproductive health care? Are we protecting women by having some of the highest rates of maternal mortality in the developed world? So where do we care about women? We care about women, so-called, when it comes to trans women, and what we care about is excluding them from society. We're not protecting women. We're not protecting any women, really, at all, except for the occasional billionaire woman. So, that argument, straight gone. Clearly, we don't care about women, and we don't care about protecting women. So any of the opposition to trans rights on a so-called feminist basis doesn't exist. And then say, oh, well, we have to protect sports. Have you considered being better at sports? I lost at tennis a lot to women, cis women. So if I were better, I wouldn't have lost. I would have won. It's as simple as that. So if you're worried about it being fair, maybe you or your kid are just not that good at sports. It's simple as that. If you are complaining about tying for 5th place in swimming, maybe the problem isn't trans swimmer. Maybe the problem is you need to get a new career path. Or be happy with 5th. I'd be happy with 5th place. So it's just an entire nothingness. It's like, oh, we're gonna complain about people being who they want to be, or people, let me clarify it actually, or correct that. People being who they are, we're going to complain about because it doesn't fit what we want them to be. And all this is to say, let's be honest, the push against trans women in particular is really a reinforcement of white European beauty standards. Because women who, we're not going to let trans women into women's bathrooms has been used to bully and harass women of color, cis women who just aren't match traditional beauty standards, etc. So it's not even really about that. Also, if you didn't know, men using women's restrooms is not actually illegal. You can do that. You can, if you're a man, you can just go in and use a women's restroom. Now, private business might make you leave. Certainly the people who might already be in there will probably be displeased. If you're a woman, you can use the men's restroom. There's no law in the books that says that you can't. So it's not even about, we're protecting people from, fake trans people who are going in there harassed, because they can just do that anyway. No rapist has ever said, you know what, I'd really like to molest a child, but unfortunately, I'm not allowed in the women's room. No one's ever done that. So just that, the whole bathroom argument is bullshit anyway. And I say all that to point out that one of the ways that we are putting children at risk, that we are putting women at risk, and putting our youth, and athletes, or whoever else, students at risk, is by denying them access to healthcare because we want to oppress trans people so bad. And I can't stomach it. I don't see how you can look at people who are in need of healthcare, who can't get it any other way because healthcare in America is so heavily privatized and corporatized that it's an entirely for-profit system, and there is no public healthcare, there is no single-payer healthcare, no good quality ones anyway, and anyone who's tried has really not cared to go far enough. I think we discussed that last week. And then stripping away what little people already have in terms of healthcare in order to hurt a group of people who barely make a blip on the radar. I don't know what percentage of the American population is trans. I'm pretty sure it's under 1%. So it's all to marginalize an already marginalized super minority group of people for reasons that are totally nonsensical and just don't hold up to actual scrutiny, that are really all based in people having a poor understanding of sex and gender and not wanting to learn. And I understand, sometimes new things can be scary, it can be confusing. If you're 40 years old and have never really heard of trans people and now suddenly you turn on the TV and you see them on TV, I can understand why, I don't sympathize, but I can understand why you'd be confused and a bit weirded out perhaps. New things are or can be strange and unusual, and often we have the instinct to respond with fear rather than curiosity. Fear is not a good reason to legislate, and fear is not a good reason to strip Americans or anyone else of their right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, all of which are declared in our Declaration of Independence and being stripped away from trans people in general, but also the American public in order to hurt trans people more. It's all bogus. It's all, a distraction, because really what they want is they want you and they want me to be mad about, be scared of, or just fighting over trans rights, so that way they can come in and rob us blind, pretty much. They can exploit us. Because if you and I are too busy fighting over whether or not trans people have a right to use the restroom of their choice, we might be a little distracted from the fact that, wait a second, we can't pay rent anymore. We can't afford groceries anymore. We can't fuel our cars anymore. We don't have trains as an alternative. And it's a big distraction. It helps the Republicans look like they are doing something, is what it is. And trans people are an easy target because they're too small to fight back. The Republicans, MAGA movement, and a lot of liberals look at this small minority group that most people don't understand or ever interact with. They say, we're going to hit them so that way you see us swinging. And as long as we just see them swinging, we're not going to ask, are they hitting the right targets? And they never are. They're not addressing poverty. They're not addressing exploitation. They're not addressing homelessness. They're not addressing war in the Middle East or war anywhere. They're not just addressing genocide. They're not addressing our needs wholesale. But as long as they look like they are addressing something, we're going to look the other way and ignore it because, hey, at least they're getting something done. My last words on the issue are, if I can't afford groceries, if I can't afford rent, if I can't afford healthcare, neither does a trans person. So we're all in the same fucking boat. If you're enjoying this show, support us by becoming a member at solidaritytelevision.org. Full list of Israel's ceasefire violations in Gaza, November 1st, 2025, via Middle East Eye. Since the Gaza ceasefire was signed last month, Israel has continued to violate the agreement. From airstrikes and shootings to arrests and incursions beyond the deployment lines, most of the violations appear unprovoked. Israel has cited alleged breaches by Hamas and other Palestinian groups to justify its actions. Hamas, however, has denied the accusations, insisting it has fully complied with the terms of the ceasefire. Many of the violations targeting civilians, meanwhile, have occurred without justification. Middle East Eye provides a detailed breakdown of all Israeli violations 3 weeks after the deal was signed. As of the 28th of October, Israeli forces had carried out 52 shootings and 55 shellings across the Gaza Strip, according to the Gaza-based government media office. Further airstrikes have been launched since. The attacks have killed 226 people, including 97 children, nearly 40% of all fatalities, and wounded a further 594 people. Israel has also demolished at least 11 civilian homes, with troops continuing to deploy remotely controlled, explosive-laden robots to destroy buildings. In 2 separate alleged attacks by Palestinians in Rafah, 3 Israeli soldiers were killed. No Palestinian group, including Hamas, has claimed responsibility. Israel launched more heavy airstrikes, killing scores of people. Arrests and incursions Israel has carried out multiple incursions beyond the so-called Yellow Line, which marks troop deployments within the Gaza Strip. Many of those killed in the attacks were shot or bombed while inside the Yellow Line, an area outside Israeli control. According to the Gaza media office, at least 9 such incursions had been reported as of the 28th of October. Hamas has also accused Israel of maintaining fire control up to 1,500 meters beyond the Yellow Line in parts of the Strip. The Israeli army has reportedly also placed yellow concrete blocks at distances ranging from 400 to 1,050 meters inside the demarcated area. Israeli forces have additionally arrested at least 29 Palestinians, some while inspecting homes near the Yellow Line, and others from the sea while fishing. During the 2-year genocidal war on Gaza, Israel closed all border crossings, including the Rafah crossing with Egypt, blocking the entry of aids and goods. The tight siege triggered a famine, declared in August, leaving scores of people dead from malnutrition and a lack of medicine. The agreement signed last month, brokered by the United States, Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey, stipulated an end to the siege by the reopening of the Rafah crossing for the movement of people and the entry of 600 humanitarian aid trucks, including 50 carrying fuel, daily. Israel has so far kept the Rafah crossing closed, preventing tens of thousands of critically wounded people from seeking treatment abroad. Only around 115 fuel trucks have entered in the past 21 days, roughly 10% of the agreed quantity. The number of trucks entering the Gaza Strip has consistently fallen well below the 600 needed daily, averaging around 145 carrying humanitarian aid each day, along with some transporting commercial goods, according to the Gaza Media Office. Items such as frozen meat, eggs, and livestock remain largely banned. According to health officials, only around 10% of essential and urgently needed medical supplies have entered. Israel has yet to permit the entry of heavy machinery required to clear rubble and reopen roads. Additionally, Hamas has accused Israel of breaching the terms related to the prisoner exchange component of the deal. The Palestinian movement said Israel has failed to provide a complete list of all prisoners currently held in its custody. Since the war began, Israel has detained thousands of people from Gaza and the occupied West Bank, but has not disclosed the whereabouts of many of them. Thousands remain missing, with families unsure whether their relatives are alive or dead, or where they are being held. Hamas said Israel had provided only an incomplete list containing errors. The group has also accused Israel of failing to release children and women from Gaza, as stipulated in the agreement. Meanwhile, Israel has accused Hamas of delaying the recovery of dead captives, citing that as justification for many of its violations. However, the agreement explicitly states that the bodies of dead captives are to be handed over as soon as Hamas can recover them, without a fixed deadline. Hamas said the recovery process requires heavy machinery and access to Israeli-controlled areas. The group has so far returned 20 living captives and 17 bodies under the agreement, with 11 more believed to remain buried in Gaza. One of the struggles in maintaining the ceasefire has been, and I don't think that this was known to the writer when the article that we just read was written, is that somewhere between 150 to 200 Hamas fighters are trapped underground in the city of Rafah. Rafah is currently occupied by Israel and is behind the yellow line. So they're in the Israeli-controlled territory rather than the Palestinian territory. These soldiers have been cut off from communication, from food, from water, and from basically everybody else for multiple weeks. And it is unknown, and as of the time of this article's writing, it was unclear to the general public that these soldiers were A, there, and B, almost certainly had no understanding that a ceasefire had happened. There was no way for them to be informed, and they were never told. So when we see some things like, oh, well, there are clashes in Rafah, and Hamas is like, well, it's not us, and the other Palestinian factions are like, well, it's not us. That is what it seems to be. It seems to be that there are these guys who have been in Rafah and were never able to be notified that a ceasefire had taken place. And so they are continuing to resist as they have for the last 2 years, and without access to support whatsoever. So once this became publicly known, the U.S., Israel, and the Palestinians started engaging in talks about what to do. The United States offered Hamas a 24-hour grace period where it's like, oh yeah, you guys can leave Rafah and go to your side of the yellow line. Totally fine. Hamas did not initially take them up on the offer. Why is unclear. I have to assume that it was due to logistics. They weren't able to get that done in 24 hours. They weren't able to strategize for it. But they did respond immediately after and say, yeah, we'll take you up on this. Israel is now refusing them that opportunity, saying that they missed the deadline. Deadline has passed, and screw them, pretty much. The United States is now offering, spokespeople for the United States have seen Israel as being childish. Direct quote was that they need to grow up and actually come to the discussion table and work this out. Really, I think it's that Trump wants to get into heaven. So he wants to have all these peace deals done. And he doesn't want to see Israel screw it up. But he also doesn't care about the Palestinian people. So there's a limit to how much he's going to actually make Israel stay in their place. But, a small glimmer of hope that these Palestinian fighters are going to be allowed to return to their lines, because Israel's initial plan and their process was filling up the underground tunnels with cement in order to trap in the fighters and bury them alive, similar to what the United States did with the Iraqi soldiers in 1991. So that's the current up-to-date, as of literally the last 3 hours of the situation. Hopefully by the time you're watching this, those soldiers would have been able to return to their own lines. One of the current American proposals, though, is disarmament. They want the soldiers in Rafah to disarm. And they have proposed even that the Hamas fighters disarm and transfer their arms to Turkey, Qatar, or Egypt. Better than disarming them to Israel, because we know disarmament to Israel results in massacre. Really, so does any disarmament. Any time the people of Palestine put down their arms until they have won, it is a victory for Israel, and Israel will continue to keep on killing as they always have. For 78 years, honestly more, but basically for 78 years. It's an ongoing genocide of the Palestinian people, and the only way that the Palestinians lose is if they stop fighting. And I understand that, maybe this disarmament thing is more of a temporary measure of, okay, you guys put down your guns, you guys can go home, and then hopefully there are more guns for them to pick up. Again, this is a proposal offered 3 hours ago. I don't know what it's going to, how it's going to turn out. Israel believes, well, no, these guys are soldiers, they're killers, we have to kill them. And they're arguing that either they be allowed to murder these gentlemen or take them home, or take them back to Israel, not home, obviously, but to Israel in order to try them. And of course, we know what that means is put them into rape and torture camps until they rape them to death, or otherwise murder them. Israel's favorite game. So it's not looking good for the soldiers in Rafah, but it's not looking good for Palestinians anyway. Hundreds have been murdered since the ceasefire that only the Palestinians have any sort of inclination to maintain. And Israel continues to murder Palestinians pretty much with impunity. So if the ceasefire agreement blows up, it will, as always, be exclusively the fault of Israel. I believe I've said this before, but it always bears repeating. No indigenous person is a terrorist. They are all innocent, even when they carry a gun. Every Palestinian is innocent, even when he carries a gun. And every Israeli, every settler, is a terrorist, even when the Israeli only plants flowers. Because in order to grow the flower, the Israeli has stolen the earth, stolen the water, and even stolen the sun in the sky. Trump administration agrees to partially fund SNAP benefits, November 3, 2025, via Mother Jones. After dramatic losses in federal court last week, the Trump administration on Monday agreed to tap an emergency pot of money to partially fund SNAP, the nation's largest anti-hunger program. But the administration refused to use additional sources of funding that could provide full payments to SNAP beneficiaries in November. SNAP funding had lapsed on Saturday in the midst of the prolonged government shutdown, the first time in the program's 61-year history that scheduled payments were not issued. Monday's developments follow two federal court rulings on Friday, ordering the government to use the emergency funding to keep partial SNAP benefits flowing to the nearly 42 million Americans who depend on the program. The dual decisions announced to a scathing rebuke of the Trump administration's vehement insistence that it could not legally fund SNAP amid a government shutdown, an argument that U.S. District Judge John McConnell said had unlawfully and needlessly plunged SNAP into crisis. There is no question that the congressionally approved contingency funds must be used now because of the shutdown, McConnell said in his ruling. In fact, the president, during his first term, issued guidance indicating that these contingency funds are available if SNAP funds lapse due to a government shutdown. Despite Monday's announcement, significant challenges for SNAP beneficiaries, many of whom are senior citizens, Americans with disabilities, households with incomes below the poverty line, and more recently, federal workers who have been furloughed or laid off, remain, as the shutdown appears on track to beat 2018's record for the longest in U.S. history. That's largely because SNAP's contingency funding is roughly $2 billion short of what is needed to fully cover November's payments, and officials warn that these partial payments will likely take weeks to distribute. Monday's move is also unlikely to put an end to efforts by administration officials, Republican leaders, and right-wing media to use the high-stakes fight over SNAP funding to attack beneficiaries. They have characterized SNAP users as lazy and out to take advantage of federal assistance, even though nearly 40% of recipients are children and millions work full-time jobs. Still, that hasn't stopped high-ranking Trump officials from peddling harmful stereotypes, including Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins, who on Friday called SNAP an extremely corrupt program. Quite frankly, it's unthinkable to me that the American public, the richest public in the history of the world, should ever be expected any member to go without food. And it's not due to a lack of it. We waste more food, as much food as is needed to feed the rest of the world. We are a huge food producer here. I mean, we have so many soybeans that just straight up aren't going to be sold now, thanks to Trump's tariff war. And who knows what's going to happen to them? They're not going to be distributed to the hungry, that's for sure. And yet, there are people in this country who are food insecure, who don't know where the next meal is coming from, aren't 100% sure that they're going to be able to get groceries next week, perhaps have to eat a limited amount of meals a week or a day, maybe down to one due to poverty, but aren't necessarily going hungry, to people who have no food, people who aren't going to be getting food, people who just cannot afford food, people who receive Social Security benefits and rely on SNAP in order to make their ends meet. People who, their rent just went up and now they have significantly less money for food, even though they're working. 40% of people on SNAP are children. So they can't afford food with their allowance? If they had that kind of money, their parents would be buying food. So the fact that there are so many people in America who are going hungry, and it's going to get worse come wintertime, and especially as these SNAP benefits are just not being paid or being paid in half and might not get there for weeks. And yet there are people in this country with $200 billion. It's not just absurd in a, not comical, but in a strange sense, but it's downright offensive, and it should be offensive. There are people in Congress with multiple millions of dollars. And they're being paid and bought by special interests, oil companies, auto companies, tire companies, the gun companies, war industry in general, and our public is starving. It should make you irate, and it makes me irate. There are grocery stores, tons and tons and tons and tons of food, but they sell it for profit. And any food that cannot be sold for profit doesn't get distributed to the public. It gets destroyed. So that way the public can't get it. Because if money cannot be made from an orange, that orange does not need to exist. Read The Grapes of Wrath, by the way. Fantastic book. Has an excellent section on this specifically, the destruction of food in order to preserve the cash value of that food. We throw away as much food as we eat. And no, I don't think that hungry people should eat our leftovers. I think you should eat your leftovers. But we have such an abundance that it's unfair and really unthinkable that people should or do go without food. I really can't emphasize that or repeat that enough. No person should go hungry, flat out. No person should go hungry. But certainly not in America. And you'll see and hear people say, oh, well, they should work harder. But most of them have jobs, and those who don't are children. So whose fault is it? Is it they're working hard but not making enough money? It's their boss's fault for not paying them enough. It's places like Walmart who keep a large percentage of their working population at poverty, and because they won't pay them full time, because it costs money, and they have to give them benefits. So they keep them below the poverty line. And then Walmart's especially bad about this, because not only do they keep people poor by not paying them enough and by exploiting their labor in order to make millions and billions of dollars, but then they give their employees a discount at the store at Walmart, except for fresh fruits and vegetables, basically stuff covered by EBT and SNAP benefits. So, SNAP is not a subsidy that is paid to poor people. It's paid to corporations. It is like much of the government assistance, much of welfare. It's not welfare for the people. It's welfare for corporations. These subsidies exist so that way Walmart can keep their imperial super profits rather than paying their employees. SNAP, WIC, and EBT exist so that way your boss can underpay you and keep your surplus value, the money that you make through your labor, and he keeps and gives you table scraps from that money that you made. And then he gets paid, especially if you work for Walmart, your boss then gets paid double when the government gives you money to buy food that he is selling. Or food that he owns, because the workers are the ones selling it. So all of this is not about workers being lazy. It's not about people scamming the system. And let's be real, who cares if they are? I would much rather see a person who doesn't need government benefits getting it than see a person who does need government benefits not getting it. Because my tax money is wasted all the time on things like murdering my brothers and sisters in Palestine because they're Palestinian. If we have to cut back on that so that way my neighbor down the street who makes plenty of money can get food for free from the grocery store, for free, sure, who cares? Who cares? It's going, the money's being spent on horror all the time. So why can't, if one of my neighbors wants to take a little bit extra for themselves, who cares? Not me. But I digress. It's not about people gaming the system. There are very, very few people who are doing this. Even fewer who are able to do it successfully. And again, 40% of recipients are children. So if they're gaming the system, good for you guys. Keep at it. Don't know how you're doing it. It's not about gaming the system. It's not about people who aren't working hard enough. It's not about people who are lazy. It's not people who are underserving. And I understand the frustration that if you see, I'm seeing someone with a brand new iPhone, get food for free, and I have to go and pay for it. Like, I intellectually, I can understand why that's a frustration. But then the question is, why aren't you getting food for free? Why do you have to pay a grocery store chain for the food and then give them a cut of profit on top? It's just like with our rent discussion from a few weeks ago. You're paying not just for an essential service, but then you're also giving an amoral middleman a cash bonus for standing in the room while you purchase the essential goods and services. So all comes down to profits and how the profit motive is destroying and impoverishing people. Your boss is using the profit motive to exploit your labor and steal your value. And then they're using that to sell you food at an upcharge for profit. And then they use those profits to buy senators, to buy representatives, to buy members of government, to make sure that your other neighbors who are in the same boat as you can't get food either. And now the Republicans are going to starve out and freeze out with the lie heap cuts the American people in order to preserve the profits of a couple billionaires, a couple small business owners, the bourgeois in general. This is a working class issue. If you work for a living rather than own for a living, you must be on the side of the SNAP beneficiaries, or you are a class traitor. Hey guys, watching YouTube is great, but we all know it's not enough. Tell us in the comments what books you're reading and share with us your wins from your organizing in the real world. Microsoft has shipped 60,000 Nvidia AI chips to the UAE under US-approved deal, November 3, 2025, via ABC News. Microsoft said Monday it will be shipping Nvidia's most advanced artificial intelligence chips to the United Arab Emirates as part of a deal approved by the U.S. Commerce Department. The Redmond, Washington software giant said licenses approved in September under stringent safeguards enable it to ship more than 60,000 Nvidia chips, including the California chipmaker's advanced GB300 Grace Blackwell chips, for use in data centers in the Middle Eastern country. The agreement appeared to contradict President Trump's remarks in a 60 Minutes interview aired Sunday that such chips would not be exported outside the U.S. Asked by CBS News' Norah O'Donnell if he will allow Nvidia to sell its most advanced chips to China, Trump said he wouldn't. "We will let them deal with Nvidia, but not in terms of the most advanced," Trump said. "The most advanced, we will not let anybody have them other than the United States." The UAE's ability to access chips is tied to its pledge to invest $1.4 trillion in U.S. energy and AI-related projects, an outsized sum given its annual GDP is roughly $540 billion. The UAE ambassador to the U.S., Yusuf Al-Otaiba, said in a statement earlier this year that the arrangement was setting a new gold standard for securing AI models, chips, data, and access. Microsoft's announcement Monday was part of the company's planned $15.2 billion investment in technology in the UAE, which it says has some of the highest per capita usage of AI. Microsoft had already accumulated in the UAE more than 21,000 of Nvidia's graphics processor chips, known as GPUs, through licenses approved under then-President Joe Biden. "We're using these GPUs to provide access to advanced AI models from OpenAI, Anthropic, open source providers, and Microsoft itself," said a company statement. I don't even know where to get started with this one. Probably going to end up talking a lot about Sudan. The UAE gets to get all these AI chips. China doesn't, and at the very least, I can understand that the United States is not going to give China computer chips. Okay. So why are we giving them to the UAE? The United American Emirates is a warmongering slave state. I think 19% of its population is Emirati. Around 60% are foreign Indian workers who are pretty much effectively enslaved. So it's a slave state. All the labor is being performed by foreign workers who can't leave. Upon arrival, their passports get confiscated for whatever their duration is, 4 years, I think is typically the duration, and they're not allowed to leave under any circumstances, if ever. They're a petrol state, so all of their money comes largely from oil sales. They don't diversify their portfolio. They've made no plans for what to do when the oil market collapses, or when the world starts moving on from oil, which we know has to happen. They spend the money on, again, enslaving people, and they spend the money on building the stupidest resorts you've ever seen that continually wash away. Vanity projects like building a massive city in the desert, and Saudi Arabia is guilty of that one especially too. Building cities in the desert with the tallest tower you've ever seen for no reason. Certainly no Freudian reason. And the rest of it they spend on neocolonial expansionist regimes in Africa, especially in Sudan, which is all over the news right now, thankfully, as it should have been for the last couple of years, and in Yemen. So the UAE gives and spends so much money on war in Sudan. They are the primary sponsor of the RSF. By now, we've certainly heard about the Rapid Support Forces in Sudan, who have been pillaging Darfur and other regions of the country and mass murdering people, especially black people in Sudan. And just a clarification, because I've seen a lot of people get this one wrong. The RSF are not Islamist. They are not a Muslim sect. The RSF are actually, on paper, secular. And so they target religious communities as well as other stuff. So whenever you see anyone complaining about like, oh, well, this is what happens when you let Islam into the country. No, this is what happens when you try to forcibly destroy Islamic people in the country, is they get killed by these so-called secular militias. The RSF is secular and is murdering people, predominantly black Muslims, at the behest of the UAE. And there's a lot of reasons to get in of why this is happening. Part of it is for gold and for other natural resources in Sudan in order to control them for the benefit of the UAE. They have huge gold stockpiles and absolutely zero gold mines in the country. Similar problem, similar feature they share with France. And they're there to control the territory, exploit natural resources, typical kind of stuff, spread their influence. And it's the exact same stuff that they've been pulling or trying to pull in Yemen for the last 10 years. The UAE also spends its money on bombing and occupying and destroying Yemen, to significantly less success thanks to the wonderful resistance of Ansar Allah, also known as the Houthis, the Yemeni people and the Yemeni government. The Ansar Allah has been leading the Yemeni people against the invasions of Saudi Arabia and the UAE, and now most recently against American and Israeli attacks on the country. So the UAE, which spends its money enslaving people, spends its money on vanity projects rather than people-first programs, spends its money on genocide in Darfur, spends its money on invasion and occupation of Sudan and Yemen, spends its money supporting Israel. They get to get all these high-class, the highest-end AI chips and computer chips that even Donald Trump said we're never going to leave the country. So I'd love to see anyone try to explain why we reward the UAE for these crimes. But really the fact is it's because they're a U.S. ally and they do what the U.S. wants. If the U.S. didn't want it, it wouldn't happen. Now, are we necessarily the driving force here like we are in Israel? Not as much, but we definitely allow it to happen. And one of the reasons, as I believe we discussed last week, that these struggles are all connected, one of the ways is straight through Sana'a in Yemen. The UAE, and sponsored, of course, as we learned last week, by the UK, has been giving arms to the RSF and has been training the RSF and rebel and mercenary militias in Yemen to overthrow the Yemenis and then to do the same in Palestine, in Gaza, to overthrow the leadership of Hamas, democratically elected leadership of Hamas. And while Ansar Allah is leading the people in a new sort of revolution in order to fix the country, unify the country, and progress the country, the UAE is seeking to destroy it. And Yemen is the only sovereign country outside of arguably Iran that has stood up for the Palestinian people in this time. The only ones who have stood up militarily, who have taken the UN and Geneva Conventions seriously and stepped in to put an end to genocide. They did it for Palestine. I would be very surprised if we don't see them start acting in support of Sudan soon. So all that to say, if you plan to go to Dubai, don't boycott the UAE as much as you can. You never go to Dubai anyway. You don't have the money for that. If you did, you wouldn't be watching this show. But don't go to Dubai. Don't buy UAE or Emirati products. If your favorite sports team has Fly Emirates on their shirt, don't wear the shirt. Complain to the team if you can. And all of this helps break the siege on Palestine, helps end the war in Sudan, and helps liberate the Yemeni people. And another reason not to go to Abu Dhabi or Dubai is if this escalates, Yemen might hit them too. So, unless you really want to get bombed by Yemen, in which case you probably would live in Israel right now, don't go to Dubai. Hey comrades, remember what Mao said, civilize the mind and make savage the body. Share with us in the comments how you're maintaining your physical health. Nobel Peace Prize winning opposition leader claims Hamas is operating in Venezuela, November 2nd, 2025, via the Canary. Venezuela is once again back in the Western news cycle because Trump has been threatening military action against them. Now, add to that the fact that the Venezuelan opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado, won the Nobel Peace Prize. As a result, she's giving interviews and teaching us all so much about her country. Dropsite News posted, Nobel Peace Prize winner and Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado welcomes U.S. airstrikes on Venezuela and the extrajudicial killing of Venezuelans at sea, insisting that strikes are about saving lives. Speaking to Bloomberg's Michal Hussein, she also claims that Hamas, the Palestinian armed resistance group, is now located in Venezuela. Machado says the deaths are Maduro's responsibility, not America's, saying the regime was warned what not to do. When asked if she supports U.S. strikes in Venezuelan territory, Machado replied, "The escalation is the only way to force Maduro to understand it's time to go." Hamas is not in Venezuela. I can't believe this has to be explained, but you probably knew this already. Hamas, the Islamic resistance movement, is only in Palestine. At all. I guess technically there are some members of Hamas in Qatar and Iran, probably not Syria anymore, maybe Lebanon. But, Hamas as a military faction, Hamas, the Izz al-Din al-Qassam brigades, the Hamas, members of the Hamas coalition in the PFLP, the Islamic Palestinian Jihad, in Lion's Den or any of the other resistance factions in Palestine, they are not in Venezuela. They have no reason to be in Venezuela. They don't want, maybe they want to be in Venezuela, who knows. But as an organization, they do not want to be in Venezuela. They want to be in Palestine. That's their only purpose for existing, is to secure the liberation of Palestine. The only reason why Hamas leadership is ever seen in other countries is for diplomatic purposes. They're in Qatar, so that way they can have an open communication to the rest of the world. They're in Iran, so that way they can negotiate and have open diplomatic relationship with Iran, etc. First of all, it's not so that way they can hide out and be spared while the Palestinian people suffer. That's a bullshit tale people have been saying since the 80s. But they don't want to be, especially not militarily, they don't want to be outside of Palestine. They don't want to be in Venezuela, so they're not going to be in Venezuela. And just like when people were worried about, oh my goodness, what if Hamas is here in the United States? Hamas is not here in the United States. They're never going to be here in the United States. Because the United States is in Palestine, and while the United States is under imperial occupation, the United States is the imperial occupation, and they're not occupying Palestine. So, or rather, the mainland United States is not Palestine. So Hamas is not outside of Palestine doing anything. So any claim that, oh, well, Hamas is X, Y, or Z, so that justifies us bombing them, bombing that country, is just nonsensical. It's bullshit, quite frankly. And Hamas in Palestine doesn't give us the excuse to bomb Palestine either. They should be there. They should be in more than just Gaza. But the Machado is a crackpot. It's probably the best term I have for her. We learned the other week she is more than happy to see hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans starve to death or die of preventable illness due to sanctions. She's happy to see the United States blow up people from her country illegally in international waters. She is more than happy to see war take place, an invasion of her own country, despite countless dead, that would be inevitable in order for her to maintain some sort of capitalistic power there. So she's not obviously not above lying. If she's not above murder, she's not above lying. And which is why, again, it's so ridiculous that she got the Nobel Peace Prize. But as to the claims that, oh, well, you know, Maduro has it coming. He's oppressing the people. This past week, Maduro launched a campaign to arm the vast majority of the population, distributing arms and ammunition all over the country to citizens wholesale in preparation for what seems to be an inevitable invasion by the United States. Now, I don't think most things are inevitable. I don't think the United States invasion of Venezuela is inevitable. We always have time to walk it back from the brink. This feels like 2002 all over again. And it feels like maybe the time period between June 26, 1914 and July 26, 1914, where we're deciding whether or not to, or Austria is deciding whether or not to invade and start World War I. It's a tense time. Things look like they're going to go in an invasion direction, but they don't have to. They don't have to, and we need to work to make sure that they don't, which is part of the reason why we do this in the first place. But if Maduro was such a brutal dictator that the people didn't want, but he controlled them through power, would it make sense to give all those people guns and arms and training? If a leader doesn't want to be overthrown by the people, and there's reason to believe that the people would do that if they had the power, would that leader give them the power to overthrow him? No. It just straight up, it does not make logical sense. So, based on Maduro's own actions, he has nothing to fear from the Venezuelan people, from the majority of the Venezuelan people. And so the pretext of, oh, liberating Venezuela from Maduro is right out the window. But even if Maduro was the person that Machado says he is, would that justify U.S. invasion? The answer is no. The United States has no right to enforce its will on another country, and certainly not through the force of arms. The United States has no right to do that whatsoever. No country really has the right to do that whatsoever, but least of all the United States. It has no right to do regime change anywhere in the world. It has no right to choose the leader of Venezuela itself. And the people of Venezuela have already chosen a leader, and his name is Nicolas Maduro. Zohran Mamdani will be the next mayor of New York City, November 4th, 2025, via NPR. A major development tonight on the local election that is being watched across the country. Democratic Socialist Zohran Mamdani will be the next mayor of New York City. That is according to a call made by the Associated Press shortly after polls closed at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. Mamdani came from behind in the Democratic primaries last summer, and then he has dominated the general election, beating former Governor Andrew Cuomo, who ran as an independent, and Republican Curtis Sliwa. Well, you heard the man. Forks are out, hands are in. It's time to dig into the rice. Mamdani has won, and I'm thrilled. I mean, the state apparatus going after Mamdani really proves that the divide in America is not between the Republicans and the Democrats, but between the working class and the ruling class. Let's see who stood against Mamdani in the election. Cuomo, who is a disgraced former governor who has committed numerous sex crimes and pretty much got away with it. Curtis Sliwa, who I probably could think of bad things to say, but let's be honest, New York was going to run a Republican, and we all know that they can get a lot worse than Curtis Sliwa. But the people who are backing Cuomo include Donald Trump, the face of the Republicans, who normally would not be expected to endorse any sort of Democrat, but he's endorsing the big business Democrat who's trying to crush the working people's candidate, Zohran Mamdani. He's joined by Elon Musk, who's endorsing and funding Cuomo's campaign in order to, again, destroy the candidate who is going to stand up for the working people against the ruling class in New York City. And then you have other leading Democrats who refuse to endorse Mamdani, who won the Democratic nomination. Hillary Clinton would not endorse Mamdani, saying that her justification being that, well, she doesn't vote in New York. I don't think she voted in Libya either, but she sure had a lot to say about who ran Libya. Obama, who I think did some speaking events with Mamdani, but refused to endorse him because Obama reinforces the Democrat party line, which is pro-capitalist, anti-worker, pro-war, pro-Israel, anti-Palestine. And Obama might have been a progressive icon, but he was certainly not a progressive individual. The deporter-in-chief did not endorse Mamdani. He didn't endorse Cuomo, but he didn't endorse Mamdani. Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer, the other two leaders of the Democratic Party, did not endorse Zohran Mamdani. Mamdani won not just based on his own merit, but because he mobilized the working class and the people of New York to vote for him because he was a good candidate with pro-worker, pro-family policies that people liked. They didn't vote for him because they identified with him. They didn't vote for him because he's Muslim. They didn't vote for him because he's a socialist. They didn't vote for him because he's a Democrat. They voted for him because they liked what he promised to do for the city. And what he promised was to bring wide sweeping change that put the working class first for once. And he promised to do so at the expense of the ruling class. For once, for a change, for a very, very positive change. And yes, from an identity politics perspective, it is really neat that New York City has an immigrant as their mayor, a Muslim man, a gentleman from Africa. That is really neat. But identity politics do not win elections. Identity does not win elections. Policy does. And that's why Harris lost in 2024. No one liked her policy. And anyone who did was going to vote for Trump anyway. People like Mamdani. People feel that he is real. They think he is authentic. And there's long been the discussion of, like, oh, I'm going to vote for the person who I feel like I could have a beer with. This guy who doesn't drink beer, it's never been something for me. But people feel that way about Mamdani. Typically, Muslims abstain from alcohol. No idea if Mamdani does. He's a New Yorker. But they voted for him because of his policies, not because of his identity. People liked Mamdani. They still do, obviously. They voted for him yesterday. And this really is a hopeful step forward for America. We're never going to vote our way out of the situation that we're in. Never. But through voting, we can make the situation that we're in easier to manage and easier to organize to get through. And Mamdani shows that the people are willing and ready to get to that point. We're talking public-owned grocery stores are a huge one. Very, very important right now when people can't afford food and aren't getting SNAP benefits. People being able to buy food without buying it from people who are selling it for profit. And all of these other policies, buses, congestion pricing, stuff that might be a little bit more specific to New York City's needs, but that the people there liked. And it's helps to create a template for what we can have in the future in other cities, of course, tailored to their own city's personal needs. I don't think anyone needs the MTA in their city if you live in Spokane. It wouldn't make sense to have a New York subway system out there. It makes sense to have a Spokane subway system, maybe. So specific policies are going to have to change. But one of the things that's widely overlooked that really drove Mamdani to the mayorship is Gaza. The people of America are tired of Zionists who use their money and power to destroy the people of Palestine. The other mayoral candidates at the Democratic primary, I'm going to go visit Israel. I'm going to go visit Israel. I'm going to go visit Israel. Mamdani was the one who said, no, he's going to work on New York. And you could substitute that for any country. If they had all been for Ukraine, say, the first thing I'm going to do is go visit Ukraine. But the people are tired of the Zionist project. The people are tired of genocide. The people are tired of their energy, their lifeblood being taken from them in order to go murder people that they don't know and have no animosity towards in Gaza, in the service of the U.S. empire's project that we call Israel, their garrison state. And that not just set him apart, but it also gave people someone to believe in. The last couple Democrats we've had have all been pro-genocide. Kamala Harris, chief among them because she ran for the presidency. Joe Biden was the president. Pro-genocide candidates. Biden was forced to drop out. Harris lost. And now we have Mamdani, anti-genocide candidate, pro-worker candidate, who, despite the so-called drawbacks of being Muslim, of being an immigrant, of being someone who is different from what we generally expect, unfortunately, an American to look like. Despite those drawbacks that put him perhaps on the back foot against an established, wealthy politician, career politician, establishment candidate like Cuomo, the people picked who they knew was right for them, rather than who they were told was right for them. And they picked Mamdani, and that's why he won. So congratulations, Zohran Mamdani. Congratulations, New York City. And let's hope we see more like this in the future all over the country. Thanks for joining me for this week's episode of The People's Report. Don't forget to subscribe at solidaritytv.org. Organizing the working classes of the world in solidarity forever.